everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going beyond those typical communication skills 101.
Oh, yeah.
And we're looking at a field where clear communication can be the difference between a good day and a really, really bad one.
Yeah.
Healthcare. Specifically, we're diving deep into how certified nursing assistants, or CNAs,
Right.
become master communicators even in those high-pressure situations. Now, you might be thinking, I'm not a CNA, why should I care? But
Yeah.
trust me,
Yeah.
the skills these folks use every single day are pure gold for anyone who wants to communicate better. Period. Think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt totally misunderstood, especially when it really mattered?
Yeah.
Well, multiply that by 100 and you'll get a sense of what CNAs face often.
Oh, absolutely. It's true. CNAs are on the front lines, interacting with patients, families, doctors, nurses, a whole symphony of personalities and needs,
Right.
all while dealing with complex medical information.
Okay, that sounds intense. So what makes CNA communication so unique? Our source material talks about them needing to be fluent in not just one, but 4 forms of communication.
That's right. We've got verbal, nonverbal, written, and even electronic communication,
Yeah. Wow.
all playing a crucial role in a CNA's day.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But let's break it down. Verbal communication seems pretty straightforward. It's just talking, right?
Well, it's more nuanced than that. Imagine a stressed and rushed CNA giving instructions compared to a calm and clear one. The words might be the same, but the tone,
Yeah.
the speed, the clarity, all of those things
Right.
impact how the message is received, especially by someone who's already feeling vulnerable or confused.
So it's like the how is just as important as the what when
Yeah.
it comes to verbal communication.
Precisely. And then you've got nonverbal communication, which is a whole other layer of
Yeah.
complexity.
Yeah.
Body language speaks volumes. Have you ever been talking to someone who's saying all the right things, but their body language is screaming something completely different?
Oh, totally. Like you can practically see the eye roll happening behind their smile.
Exactly. That mismatch between verbal and nonverbal cues
Right.
can instantly erode trust.
Yeah.
And in a healthcare setting where trust is fundamental,
Right.
that can have serious consequences.
Okay, so nonverbal communication is huge, GE.
Like,
What about written communication? Is that just charting and medical records?
it's much more than that.
Okay.
Think about the instructions a CNA might leave for another caregiver during a shift change,
Right.
or the notes they take on a patient's condition.
Mm-hmm.
Any ambiguity or lack of clarity in written communication
Yeah.
can have a direct impact on patient safety.
Wow. I hadn't thought about it like that. The stakes are high. And then there's the whole electronic communication piece,
Right.
which is already a minefield even outside of healthcare.
Uh-huh.
Misinterpreted emails,
Yes.
texts that come off wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And multiply that pressure in a healthcare setting. A miscommunication in an email or a patient portal message could lead to missed appointments, medication errors,
Wow.
all sorts of problems.
Mm.
CNAs have to be incredibly mindful of how their electronic communication comes across, especially since tone is so easily lost
Right.
in digital formats.
Okay, so we've got these 4 forms of communication, and it's clear that CNAs are juggling a lot.
Yeah.
But what specific skills help them navigate these tricky situations? Our source material mentions a master communicator toolkit.
Yes.
What's in that toolkit?
Well, one of the foundational tools is active listening.
Okay.
It's not just hearing. It's about demonstrating that you're fully engaged
Right.
and genuinely trying to understand the other person's perspective.
So it's like a CNA with a patient in pain isn't just running through a checklist of questions.
Yeah.
They're really tuning in, making eye contact, maybe leaning in, not interrupting.
You got it. It's about picking up on both verbal and nonverbal cues
Yeah.
and making the other person feel heard and understood.
That makes so much sense. What else is in this communication toolkit?
Another essential tool is asking open-ended questions instead of a closed-ended question like, "Are you okay?" which can be answered with a simple yes or no.
Right.
A skilled CNA might ask, "Tell me how you're feeling today."
Okay.
That invites the patient to open up
All right.
and share what's really going on.
It's like you're opening the door for a real conversation, not just a surface level check-in.
Right. And then there's clarifying, which is especially important in healthcare, where medical jargon can be confusing for patients.
Yeah.
A CNA doesn't just say, "Take your meds."
Right.
They take the time to explain what the medication is,
Yeah.
why it's important, and how it should be taken.
It's like they're translating a foreign language.
Exactly.
Making the complex understandable.
And finally, we can't forget empathy and cultural sensitivity.
yeah.
CNAs work with people from all walks of life, with diverse backgrounds, beliefs, and communication styles.
Right. Imagine being scared and confused in a hospital, and then having a CNA who not only speaks your language, but also understands your cultural background
Yes.
and how it might be influencing your experience.
It can make a world of difference.
Wow.
A culturally sensitive CNA can pick up on subtle cues,
Yeah.
avoid misunderstandings, and create a genuine sense of connection, even in what can feel like a very impersonal environment.
Okay, so we've got this awesome communication toolkit,
Yeah,
but let's be real. CNAs face some serious communication challenges.
sure.
Our sources call this the challenge round.
Mm.
It's like they're going through an obstacle course of difficult situations.
It's a great analogy. Let's start with language barriers. We often think of this as just speaking different languages.
Right.
But it's also about medical terminology being confusing for patients.
Yeah, we've all been in that situation where the doctor's using all these fancy medical terms and you're just nodding along pretending you understand.
Exactly. But skilled CNAs are pros at using plain language,
Yeah,
visual aids,
right.
and whatever it takes to make sure the patient truly grasps what's going on.
Okay, language barriers are one thing, but what about when things get really emotionally charged? Dealing with an upset family member or a distressed patient?
Yeah,
That's gotta be tough.
it is. And that's where emotional barriers come in. A CNA can't take it personally when someone's lashing out.
Right.
They need to stay calm,
Yeah.
use active listening, and validate the person's feelings, even if they don't agree with them.
That's a really important point. Think about a time when you were really upset about something. What helped you calm down? Probably not someone telling you to just chill out.
Right. It's about acknowledging the emotion, not dismissing it.
Right.
And then there's the challenge of cognitive barriers,
Yeah.
where a patient might have dementia,
Yeah.
confusion,
Right.
or developmental delays
Mm-hmm.
that affect their ability to communicate.
So in these cases, it's like the CNA has to become a communication detective,
Yes.
figuring out how to best connect with the patient and understand their needs.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They might have to use simpler language,
Mhm.
rely more on nonverbal cues, or adjust their approach based on the patient's specific needs. It's about meeting the patient where they are cognitively speaking.
Okay, so we've covered the communication toolkit and the challenge round, but I'm curious, how does this all play out in real-world scenarios? Our sources highlight 3 specific situations that really bring these skills to life.
Let's dive into those. The first scenario involves a nonverbal patient.
Okay.
This is where those communication detective skills really come into play.
Right.
The CNA has to use every clue available, from body language and facial expressions to even subtle changes in behavior, to figure out what the patient needs.
It's like they're piecing together a puzzle,
Exactly.
using nonverbal cues to decode the patient's message.
And in a way, it makes their role even more crucial for that patient's well-being, because they're often the voice for someone who can't speak for themselves.
That's so true.
Okay.
Okay, what about the second scenario?
The second scenario drops us right into a high-tension situation, dealing with an upset family member.
Ooh, I can already feel the stress.
Imagine this.
Yeah.
A family is worried about their loved one.
Hmm.
Maybe there's been a delay in care,
Yeah.
and tensions are running high. The CNA needs to stay calm,
Right.
de-escalate the situation, and find a way to communicate clearly and compassionately,
Yeah.
even in the face of anger or frustration.
It must take a lot of emotional intelligence to handle that kind of situation gracefully,
Yeah.
not letting the other person's emotions dictate your own reactions.
It does. But
Yeah.
it's a skill that's valuable not just in healthcare, but in any situation where emotions run high,
Mhm.
whether you're dealing with a difficult coworker, a frustrated customer, or even a family argument.
Right.
Knowing how to de-escalate and communicate effectively can make all the difference.
Okay, so we've got nonverbal patients and upset families. What about the third scenario?
The third scenario focuses on conflict resolution, but in a very specific context. A disagreement between colleagues.
Ooh, that can get tricky.
Imagine 2 CNAs who have different observations about a patient's condition. They need to be able to respectfully debate their viewpoints,
Right.
focusing on the facts and ultimately what's best for the patient's safety.
It's like a respectful debate where the goal is to find the best solution, not to win the argument.
Exactly. And that's a model that can be applied to any workplace conflict, really.
Right.
Focusing on the shared goal.
Yeah.
Communicate clearly and respectfully, and being willing to listen to different perspectives
Right.
can help resolve disagreements constructively.
So we've gone through these 3 scenarios, and it's clear that CNAs have some serious communication superpowers.
Yeah.
But I think what's really cool is that these skills aren't just for healthcare professionals.
That's what I find so fascinating about this deep dive.
Right.
These communication techniques are pure gold in any relationship. Think about it. Dealing with a difficult coworker, navigating a tricky conversation with your partner, or even helping a friend who's going through a tough time.
Yeah, right. We can all learn from the CNA toolkit. But honestly, I'm still feeling a little overwhelmed by all this information. Is there a way to distill it all down to a few key takeaways?
You bet. Let's shift gears and talk about why this matters.
Okay.
Beyond the walls of a healthcare facility.
Yeah.
What can we as non-CNAs learn from these communication masters? If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's about recognizing that effective communication is a foundational skill for pretty much every aspect of life.
Okay, I'm totally with you there. But how do we actually take these insights from the CNA world and apply them to our own often messy communication challenges?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's about practice. Think of it like learning a new language.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect to be fluent overnight.
Right.
You'd start with the basics,
Yeah.
try to use the language in real-world situations, and gradually become more comfortable over time.
So we're not going to magically transform into communication gurus just by listening to this deep dive. Darn.
I wish it were that easy. But the good news is that even small changes can make a big difference. What stands out to you from the CNA toolkit? Is there one technique you could see yourself trying in your own life?
Honestly, the one that really grabbed me was active listening. I mean, I think I'm a good listener, but when I really think about it, I'm probably guilty of interrupting or letting my mind wander or jumping in with solutions before fully understanding the other person's perspective.
That's so relatable. We've all been there.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Active listening is a skill that can be learned and improved with practice. It's about making a conscious effort to really tune in, to pay attention, not just to the words someone is saying, but to their body language,
Right.
their tone of voice, the emotions behind their words.
So it's like putting down your phone,
Yes.
making eye contact, and really focusing on the other person. No multitasking, no planning your response while they're still talking.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And it might feel a little awkward at first, but I guarantee you'll be amazed by the difference it makes when people feel truly heard.
Yeah.
It builds trust. It de-escalates conflict.
Right.
And it opens the door for genuine connection.
Okay, I'm convinced active listening is going on my communication toolkit for sure. But what about those really tricky situations like when you're dealing with someone who's super emotional or maybe not even being rational? Does a CNA playbook have any advice for those situations?
It absolutely does. And one of the most powerful techniques CNAs use is validation.
Okay.
Remember, we talked about this earlier in the context of dealing with an upset family member.
Right, right. It's about acknowledging the person's feelings even if you don't agree with them.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean you're condoning their behavior
Right.
or that you agree with their perspective. It's simply about saying, I see you, I hear you, your feelings are valid.
That sounds so simple, yet so powerful. Like just by acknowledging someone's emotions, you can take the heat out of a situation.
It's a bit like magic, honestly, because when people feel validated,
Yeah.
they're less likely to escalate.
Less likely to dig in their heels. It creates a sense of safety and understanding that can open up a space for dialogue.
Okay, so we've got active listening and validation in our toolkit. What else can we borrow from the CNAs?
Well, let's go back to that idea of using plain language. We talked about this in the context of medical jargon,
Yeah.
but it applies to so many other situations. Think about how often we use jargon or acronyms or just overly complicated language in our daily communication.
Oh, totally. Especially in the workplace. Sometimes it feels like everyone's speaking a different language, even though we're all technically speaking English.
It's like we're trying to impress each other with our vocabulary instead of actually trying to communicate effectively.
Right. And then things get lost in translation and misunderstandings happen and frustration builds.
Yeah.
So how do we break this bad habit?
It's about being mindful of our audience. Who are we talking to?
Right.
What's their level of understanding? And then adjusting our language accordingly. It's not about dumbing things down. It's about being clear, concise, and easy to understand. So it's like asking ourselves, if I were explaining this to my grandma, how would I say it?
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Because chances are your grandma would appreciate the clear and simple explanation,
Yeah.
just like anyone else who's trying to understand something new or complex.
Okay, so plain language is a must. What about those times when we have to deliver bad news or have a tough conversation?
Yes.
Those are the situations that I always dread.
I think those are the situations where empathy really comes into play.
Okay.
And it's not just about feeling sorry for someone. It's about trying to understand their perspective,
Yeah.
to see the world through their eyes.
That sounds really hard, especially when you're the one who has to deliver the bad news.
It is, but it's also incredibly powerful because when you approach a difficult conversation with empathy,
Yeah.
it changes the entire dynamic.
Right.
It shows the other person that you care, that you're not just going through the motions.
So it's like even if the message itself is difficult, the way you deliver it can make a huge difference in how it's received.
Absolutely. And here's a little trick that CNAs use. When you're delivering bad news or having a tough conversation, try to sandwich the difficult part between two positive things.
Wait, like a compliment sandwich?
Exactly. So you might start by acknowledging something positive,
Right.
then deliver the difficult news, and then end with another positive statement or gesture of support.
Okay, I can see how that would soften the blow a little bit. It's like you're creating a more balanced and supportive context for the difficult message.
Precisely. And it shows that you're not just there to deliver the bad news and run.
Right.
You're there to support the person through it.
So we've got active listening, validation, plain language empathy, and the compliment sandwich. I'm starting to feel like I could actually handle a challenging conversation now. But I'm curious, what about conflict resolution? I mean, disagreements are a part of life, and sometimes they can get pretty heated. How do CNAs navigate those situations?
That's a great question. And honestly, one of the most important things CNAs do in conflict situations is to focus on the facts. They try to separate their emotions from the situation
Yeah.
and look at the evidence objectively.
So it's like taking a step back and saying, okay, let's look at the situation calmly and rationally without letting our feelings cloud our judgment.
Exactly. And that can be really challenging, especially when you're in the heat of the moment.
Right.
But it's crucial for finding a resolution that works for everyone involved.
Okay, so focus on the facts. What else?
Another key skill is perspective taking. CNAs are constantly interacting with people from different backgrounds
Right.
and with different viewpoints.
Yeah.
So they've learned to put themselves in other people's shoes
Yeah.
and try to understand where they're coming from.
That makes so much sense. It's like instead of just assuming the other person is wrong or being difficult, you try to see things from their perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
It's about empathy, but it's also about curiosity.
Yeah.
Why does this person feel this way?
Right.
What's their experience?
Yeah.
What's their motivation?
And once you understand that, you can start to build a bridge of understanding, even if you don't agree on everything.
Exactly, and that's where compromise comes in. It's about finding a solution that meets everyone's needs, even if it means giving up a little bit of what you want.
So it's not about winning or losing. It's about finding a solution that works for everyone.
Precisely. And that takes flexibility,
Yeah.
creativity, and a willingness to let go of the need to be right all the time.
Okay, so we've got focusing on the facts, perspective taking, and compromise. Those are some seriously powerful conflict resolution skills. But I'm curious, is there anything else that we as non-CNAs can learn from these communication masters?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me is the importance of nonverbal communication. We talked about this earlier, but it's worth repeating. Our body language,
Right.
our tone of voice, our facial expressions,
Yeah.
all of these things communicate volumes often without us even realizing it.
Right. It's like you can say one thing, but your body language can be saying something completely different.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of our nonverbal cues.
Yeah.
Are we making eye contact? Are we smiling?
Right.
Are we leaning in or crossing our arms?
So it's like doing a quick body language check before we even open our mouths, making sure our nonverbal cues are aligned with the message we're trying to convey.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And it's not about being fake or
Right.
putting on a show. It's about being authentic and present in our interactions.
Okay, so nonverbal communication is key. Anything else?
One last thing. CNAs are masters of adaptability. They have to adjust their communication style constantly, depending on who they're talking to and what situation they're in.
So it's like they're communication chameleons,
That's a great way to put it.
blending into whatever environment they're in while still staying true to themselves.
And that's a skill that we can all benefit from developing. Being able to read a room, to understand the dynamics at play, and to adjust our communication style accordingly can make us more effective communicators in any situation.
So it's not about being a one-size-fits-all communicator. It's about being flexible and responsive to the needs of the situation.
Exactly. And that takes practice self-awareness and a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
Wow. We've covered so much ground today. we've gone from the 4 forms of communication to active listening validation, plain language, empathy, conflict resolution, nonverbal cues, and adaptability. It's like we've been on a whirlwind tour of the CNA communication universe.
It's been quite the journey.
Mm.
But I think the most important takeaway is this. Effective communication is a skill that anyone can learn and improve no matter what your background or profession. And by borrowing from the playbook of these communication masters,
Yeah.
we can all become more confident, more compassionate,
Right.
and more connected communicators.
That's a great way to sum it up. But I think our listeners are probably thinking, okay, this is all great, but how do I actually do this? How do I take these insights from the CNA world and make them work in my life? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, it's one thing to talk about communication skills, but it's another thing to actually put them into practice.
You're absolutely right. It's like having all the ingredients for a delicious meal,
Right.
but not knowing how to cook. You need a recipe,
Yeah.
a plan, a way to bring those ingredients together.
So what's the recipe for becoming a better communicator using these CNA-inspired techniques?
It starts with small experiments. Don't try to overhaul your entire communication style overnight.
Oh.
That's just setting yourself up for failure. Instead,
Right.
pick one technique that resonated with you, maybe active listening,
Okay.
maybe using plain language,
Mm-hmm.
or validating someone's emotions. Just one thing
Okay.
to focus on.
Okay. So choose one technique, but then what? Do we just like sprinkle it randomly into our conversations?
It's about being intentional.
Okay.
Think about the situations where you typically struggle with communication. Maybe it's meetings at work. Maybe it's conversations with your partner.
Right.
Maybe it's dealing with a particularly challenging family member.
Yeah.
Choose one situation and make a conscious effort to apply that chosen technique.
So it's like setting a small, achievable goal. Instead of trying to climb Mount Everest, I'm just going for a walk around the block.
Exactly. And pay attention to what happens.
Yeah.
Notice how people respond when you truly listen to them.
Yeah.
Notice how you feel when you validate someone's emotions, even if you don't agree with them.
It's like becoming a communication scientist, conducting our own little experiments in real-world situations.
I love that analogy.
Yep.
And remember, you're not going to be perfect at it right away.
Right.
There will be times when you forget to use the technique or when it doesn't have the effect you were hoping for.
Right.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
It's all part of the learning process.
So it's about being kind to ourselves, being patient, and celebrating those small wins along the way.
Wow.
And I guess like any experiment, it's important to take notes to reflect on what worked and what didn't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, what worked well?
Mm-hmm.
What could I have done differently? What did I learn about myself and about the other person through this interaction?
Yeah.
The more you reflect, the more you'll learn and grow as a communicator.
This is starting to sound less like a communication challenge and more like a personal growth journey.
And that's exactly what it is. Because at the end of the day, communication is about connection. It's about building bridges of understanding, empathy, and compassion. And when we invest in those skills, we don't just become better communicators.
Yeah.
We become better human beings.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big, bold, provocative thought you want to leave our listeners with? Something that will stick with them long after they hit that stop button.
Here's something to chew on. We often think of communication as something we do to other people. We talk at them.
Right.
We try to persuade them. We try to get them to see things our way.
Right. It's like we're trying to transmit our message.
Yeah.
Almost like sending a radio signal.
Exactly. But what if we shifted our perspective and thought of communication as something we do with other people?
Okay.
A collaborative process of creating meaning and connection.
Ooh, I like that. It's less about transmission and more about co-creation.
Exactly. And when we approach communication from that perspective, it changes everything. It becomes less about being right and more about understanding. Less about winning and more about connecting. Less about talking and more about listening.
That's really powerful. I'm going to be mulling that over for a while.
Hmm.
Well, on that thought-provoking note, it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the world of CNA communication. But before we go, we want to hear from you. What communication techniques are you going to try? What challenges are you facing? What breakthroughs have you had?
Share your stories with us. We're all on this journey together,
Mm-hmm.
learning, growing, and striving to become more compassionate and connected communicators.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep those communication skills sharp, and remember, the world needs more empathetic listeners, clear communicators, and those willing to bridge those understanding gaps.